Everybody see my screen all right? Can you see the presentation? Fantastic. So, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's well, and thanks for joining me today. This is Osborne and Allan's first live webinar. So again, a big thank you for coming along today to find out a bit about Osborne and Allan and what we can do to kind of support you in international recruitment. So during the next hour, I'm going to be discussing international recruitment, why this could be a benefit to you and what support is available for you. And you'll also hear who's one of our directors about all the recent changes in the last few months with this, because I'm sure you'll be aware there has been quite significant changes. Has been confusing quite a lot of people that do international recruitment. So hopefully a bit clearer for you today and what that means for the health and social care sector with regards to international recruitment. Once we've heard from Febin today, we're going to Allan, Allan Povey. Allan is the specialist lead for the Centre for Supply and has piloted the scheme just recently, international recruitment in Scotland. So he's just going to give us some of his insights and what he's found along the way on his journey. There will be time at the end for any questions and answers, but I would kindly ask you to wait until the end if you've got any questions, or that box, and we'll address it at the end of the presentation. So just to start, I'm just going to move my slide on. Just like to tell you a little bit about Osborne and Allan. So Osborne and Allan was founded around 8 years ago now. We have provided to a multitude of care homes in the UK over the last 8 years. We're also part of the wider group for sourcing and supplying to the NHS over 3,000 nurses just in 2023. Under that group, we also have access to our own training and visa support teams and systems in place. Within Osborne, we have a team with over 50 years experience combined between us all. So we do have quite a knowledge in the sector and in the health and social care sector. So we would be able to support you with anything that you would need. A bit about our agenda for today. So run through international recruitment, how we can help you and support you, the recent changes to this and what this means, and then obviously Allan's going to touch a bit upon the OSCE support that we can provide. As I said, we've got our own training centre, so it's a bit of information about that, and then at the end we'll go to the questions and answers. Just going to touch upon. So international recruitment has been a vast source of recruitment in the health and social care sector for many years, but especially COVID. And I'm sure a lot of you will agree the numbers of vacant COVID hit an all-time high, and that's when we really seen an increase in international recruitment. International recruitment kind of becoming the backbone of the health and social care sector. With recruitment, the NHS wouldn't have survived, a lot of the care sector and private care sector, because, I mean, let's face it, locally we're not managing to get the numbers to fill the vacant positions we currently have in the UK. So it's just not to keep us going. But international recruitment does come with a lot of myths. I'm sure you'll have heard them along the way, but what I'm going to try and do is myths and try and give you a bit more information and how it can be less scary into international recruitment. So the first myth we always is it's too difficult to get a Home Office licence. That just isn't really at all. As long as you can evidence that you have a need for this recruitment, you will get the licence. If you've got the evidence, of your rota, vacancies, your attempts at filling this, and it's just not been successful, as long as you have all that, will get approved, and we are here to support you to be able to get that licence. That's what we're along with at the very, very beginning of your journey. The second thing, almost always, is that it's just too expensive. And I think this is probably a myth surrounding international recruitment. It isn't true. Let me just break it down a little bit for you. So by the time you take advertising for new staff, agency spends, staff time, so the time that your own staff spend on the recruitment process, which could be the endless trailing through all these, to shortlisting these candidates, you know, to interview recruitment process then that follows that. And a lot of the time, some of them won't even join, you know, so you've got to think of all things, and that all builds expense. Using like Osborne and Allan, we take away all that for you, and we don't charge until your recruit is in with you and has started with you. We do all the shortlisting, recruitment, advertising, you know, so all you or your team has got to do is interview, and we will do everything else for you. Which brings us nicely on to the last point that I want to kind of cover today. It's too time consuming. We hear this a lot, and especially the 7 months. This has been a massive concern. There has been delays due to the changes that have happened recently in the Home Office, which we'll touch upon later. But this has since resolved, and we are seeing the turnaround speeds what they used to be, which is turning around a lot quicker. And as I mentioned, take on a lot of the recruitment process for you. So all you need to do is interview. On my screen just now, I've got a list of the services that we need. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this at the moment, but I'll touch upon them. So support, including licensing and visa applications. So as I mentioned previously, to obtain your license if you don't already have this in place. If you've got this in place, we'll go through the whole process with you, find out your needs, what your and your care staff, and we will then get to work on shortlisting the candidates for based upon what you've touched upon with us. We will then interview process and the recruitment process, and we will support you with applications and COS, which is your SMS management system. And fully support with the SMS management system. Myself and Febin would be there from the beginning of needing this, and if you're not familiar with it, the SMS management system is for your sponsorship. So it is a very important part of the process, and it can be confusing to use, especially if you've never used it before, and I'm sure if on that, we can take all that away again, or we can work together and get the certificates issued that way as well. Pastoral support, which even goes from things from arranging flights for your candidates coming over to pre-departure meetings with them and you, passing on anything that they might need, and further support when they arrive. If you're recruiting, we offer OSCE training and exam support, and as a sideline, Home Office audits and inspections on your documents. So we will compile all for you, but it is always handy to keep these audited and make sure that you're in line with the Home Office guidance. Just covers you, so we can help with that as well. I'm going to pass on to Febin, and Febin will update us all on the recent changes in the Home Office. So Febin, are you all right to share your screen?
Thanks, Emma. Thank you. I'm just going to change my screen. Emma, can you see my screen? Right. Sorry, I got two different screens, so I might be looking at a different camera. So apologies. Just to introduce myself, my name is Febin Suryak. I'm a qualified nurse from India. So I'm a migrant nurse, came through this route, been through this route, and also felt what other of my colleagues been through. So this is where we set up this business supporting employers around the country. So I have prepared some of the informations based on the questions what I normally get from some of the employers. So there have been significant changes in the immigration since April this year. So there've been a lot of changes. So I'll just go through some of the key changes, but I'll be happy to answer if you have any questions at the end of this meeting. So the first changes, these changes were from...
I can only see the Teams meeting. I don't know if anybody else can see the presentation or not.
Okay. Let me just reshare that again. Sorry, how about now?
That's it now.
Sorry, can you see it now?
I can see them, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So some of these changes are effective from 11th of April 2024. So the key changes, there have been a short SOC code list, occupation list issued by the Home Office, and some of the occupation codes being changed since 11th of April. So for example, if you are sponsoring a registered nurse, we always been using an occupation code 2231. So that's now changed to 2237. So if you are going back to your sponsorship management system or SMS, you wouldn't be able to find 2231 for registered nurses. That code has been changed. And one of the key changes on that, up until 11th of April, we always had one SOC code for nurses, regardless of which register they are in, whether they are in a adult register or mental health register. It has always been the same SOC code. But at the moment, Home Office has now split that into 4 different categories, one for mental health and one for pediatric, and one for learning disability, and the last one for adult nurses. So that's now it's coming into other registered nursing professionals. You wouldn't see it as adult nurses, but it is coming under other registered nursing professionals. So that's where registered nurses or adult nurses will fall into. So that's the SOC code. Then if you're sponsoring a mental health nurse, you should use 2235. Then there's another new SOC code, which is predominantly for NHS or sort of primary care settings, which is 2234, which is registered nurse practitioners. Then previously we had 2 SOC codes for care workers and senior care workers. It used to be 6145 and 6146. That's now changed to 6135, which is for care workers or home carers, and the 6136 for senior care workers. So these are the newest changes, and these are the most common SOC codes we normally use in the health and social care sector. So I'll move to the next slide. So as it's changed the salary, at the same time, there'll be some changes on the salary requirement. At the moment, the new effect, you would need to have minimum £38,700 salary requirement for someone to be sponsored to work for you. That is the minimum salary requirement for the nationwide for any profession, but there are exemptions for health and social care sector. So especially if you're sponsoring some of these professions, there is a minimum salary requirement which need to be covered. And just on this part, these salaries are based on a 37.5 hours contract. See, for example, up until last year, if you're sponsoring a care worker or senior care worker, the minimum salary requirement was £10.10 per hour, and the minimum salary was 20,000. So care worker salary has now gone up to £23,200 annually on a 37.5 hours contract, or has to be minimum £11.90. So that's the minimum salary you would need to pay if you are sponsoring a care worker. And the new salary will also be applicable if you have an existing care worker who is actually going for renewal, then you would be required to pay the updated salary. With regards to nurses, there's a separate salary which is based on NHS agenda for change. And in Scotland, which is at the moment £30,229, which equates around £15.46 per hour. So that changes every year based on the NHS agenda, but we're in England, which is 28,000 at the moment, and then same in Wales. So that's a salary requirement, and it is based on 37.5 hours. One of the key changes into this, there will be some, the salaries were more of pro rata basis, and we have seen a number of cases quite recently. Employers were issuing COs based on a 30 hours contract and with an hourly rate of 15.46. That wouldn't satisfy the minimum salary requirement. The minimum salary requirement has to be, if it's a registered nurse, has to be 30,229, even if the hours are less. So it's not just the hourly rate you would need to look into. You would need to make sure they're getting minimum of 30,229 every year. So that's the same with care workers and the senior care workers. I believe there might be some changes coming through this within the next couple of months. I think there'll be some changes coming to the Scotland in terms of salary. Probably Allan might know about it. I think the Scottish government is looking into have a set of minimum salary requirement, which is, I think it is around £23,800. So you'll be hear that from the Scottish government within the next couple of months if that happens. So moving to the next slide. So when you can be paid less, so there are some other occupations within the social care sector where you would need to sponsor migrant workers. Some of the key roles like care home managers or deputy managers or floor managers. So these, if you are sponsoring someone into these roles, their salary requirements are different. So the current salary requirement, as I said, the minimum salary requirement is 38,700, but if you are sponsoring someone in the healthcare or education sector, there is an exemption on the salary. See, for example, if you are sponsoring a care home manager or care manager with the SOC code 1232, their standard salary rate is at the moment £36,400 per annum. And they also have another rate, which is called lower going rate, which is £28,700. And the way how we define whether it's a standard rate or lower going rate, if they are new to that profession, if they are new to that role, or if they are now moving from a student route to a care manager role, or they are from a recent graduate route, then you'll be able to pay them on a lower going rate, which is £28,700. But please bear in mind, some of these jobs will not fall under NHS occupation list. Therefore, you would need to meet the experience salary, which means if someone is doing that job continuously for 2 years, they'll be considered as experienced, where you would need to pay the standard rate. I'll give you an example just to make it a bit more clear. So if you're sponsoring someone as a care manager or deputy manager with the SOC code for 1232, obviously every employer tends to issue a COS for 3 years. So if you're issuing a COS for 3 years on a lower going rate, your salary has to be £28,700 for the first 2 years. Then on the third year, you have to pay them minimum £36,400 or the current standard rate. If you issue a COS with a lower going rate for 3 years, there will be a chance for you'll get further questions from Home Office, or they might refuse the application saying that the immigrant applicant hasn't met the minimum salary requirement. So the standard rate is just is for an experienced individual. The lower going rate is actually based on the exemption. So that's with other provisions. So if it's a provision which is in the NHS job list, then your minimum salary requirement is 23,200 or based on that occupation. There's a link available on the Home Office website where you'll be able to see each individual occupation and their minimum salary rate and also the lower going rate. Moving to the next slide. So there was some of the other changes happened to the industry quite recently. The first thing is care workers and senior care workers are no longer allowed to bring their dependents if they've been sponsored within the country or if they've been sponsored from overseas. However, if you have an assisting employee who's already been sponsored as a care worker or senior care worker before 4th of April 2024, they can still bring their dependents. If they have dependents, they can still bring them. This is one of the most common questions we get from employees. They have some of the assisting employees, they wanted to bring their families, and they've been on the roll probably more than 6 months or over a year. They are allowed to bring it. The second one, we often get a question from the employees. They tend to get a lot of applications from applicants who are on a graduate visa or post-study work visa. So just to give you a bit of information about graduate visa. So if it's a student, if they have successfully completed a program, the government would allow them to work on a graduate visa for the next 2 years to gain experience, knowledge and skill in that area they studied. Which on a graduate visa, they don't have any restrictions, which means they're allowed to work any number of hours and they can do any job. So they are allowed, they don't need a sponsorship. They can continue on that visa for the next 2 years until their visa runs out. Then the next point is actually on the migrant students, students already in the UK. So students are allowed to work up to 20 hours during the term time or during the course time. What we normally see, there's two things we often see from some of our compliance visits. One is actually, we often see some of the students working with multiple employers, doing 20 hours each in multiple places. So it is your responsibility that you would need to put that information to that applicant that they shouldn't be allowed to work with another employer for more than 20 years. So it's probably worth to put that in your contract or probably in your offer letter that they shouldn't be working more than 20 hours during their term time. And often they're allowed to work full time during their holidays or off term time. Normally, every university would issue a letter confirming their academic calendar, also along with their vacation times. So you would need to retain that evidence in your records before you allow them to work full time. So every university would start issuing those letters. So that letter would be kept as an evidence before you employ someone on a full-time hours on their leave time. Moving to the next one, which is right to work check. So when it comes to right to work check, there have been some changes since 21st of June 2024, quite recently. And I'm expecting some more changes to come through within the next couple of weeks. So one of the key changes with the current system, every migrant worker is being issued a biometric residence card, which is called BRP. And every BRP is valid until 31st of December 2024. So if you're an employer, if you work in HR profession, you must have seen the BRP cards are expiring on the 31st of December 2024. The Home Office is planning to replace the BRP system by the end of the year, and they have started rolling out a new system called e-Visa quite recently. And they have started emailing to the migrant workers, asking them to register on the Home Office website, sign up to the account, and they will be able to prove their status through an immigration account, which is called e-Visa. So which is a digital platform where they will be able to show their status. So the BRP cards will be replaced by the end of the year, and everyone who is on a migrant visa would be automatically moved to the e-Visa system. So when it comes to right to work check, this is where we often see there's a lot of confusions around. It is a legal requirement that you have to do a right to work check for every employee, regardless whether they are migrant worker, whether they are a domestic worker. So you have to conduct a right to work check for every employee. And there has been penalties on the right to work check part, which is a legal requirement. The penalty has now gone up to £45,000 per employee. So it is very important we do that right to work check. So there will be some sort of guidance from the Home Office. So the first thing, Before you employ anyone, you have to manually check their identity using their passport or any other right to work document or BRP. So passport is the first and foremost document to verify. If there's any reason, if they don't have passport, you could actually use a national identity card if it's a British citizen or Irish citizens. And British and Irish citizens, they do have an alternative option to verify the identity. So first thing, you have to physically see the passport and physically verify the document. The second one, you could actually use an identity document validation technology, which is available by identity service providers. There will be a number of identity service providers available in the market, including post office. There have been some softwares where you'll be able to confirm the identity of British and Irish nationals. And if it's anyone else, if the applicant is from any other nationality, they would have a biometric residence permit, or they might have another document to confirm their legal status in the UK. This is something especially with EU citizens. EU citizens has been given the right to work status through EU SS scheme, which is EU settlement scheme. So they should have a document, or they might have a document to prove that their legal status in the UK. If the applicants are from outside of the non-European area, then they will be given a biometric residence permit card, where you'll be able to view their right to work through the share code. And you maybe get some applicants who doesn't have these documents in scenarios where they have an appeal going through the Home Office, or they have a administrative review, or they have an outstanding application with the Home Office. Those scenarios, you should be able to check their status using an employer checking service. There is a link on the government website where you'll be able to input some of the information and put a request to the Home Office. And the Home Office would normally respond to you by email within 5 working days, normally the turnaround 5 to 7 working days, within a report that whether they will be allowed to work, and if they are allowed to work, if there is any restrictions. So that will be given. So if you get someone who doesn't have a legal status to prove, you can always use the employer check-in service to confirm their legal status in the UK. Moving to the next slide, just on how to do this biometric ID checks. So these are the points we need to consider before we employ anyone. So the first thing, we would need to manually verify the original document, just like passport, BRP, or ID documents. And we need to confirm they are genuine by verifying their picture, date of birth. So these are the two information we normally use to identify, and again, the name to identify the applicant, and the documents are genuine. Then it is a legal requirement. We have to retain a copy of that original documents electronically or hard copy. So that document need to be kept throughout the employment period and also after the employment period. We have seen with some of the employers who actually ask the applicants to email the copy of their passport and the BRP cards where they kept it electronically. You have a legal responsibility to ensure that you have physically seen these original documents and physically photocopied or kept as a hard copy. I wouldn't advise you to accept an electronic copy from the applicants because there's a chance that can be tampered. Then the second part, you must maintain a record yourself, which is available for Home Office to check, even if you're not a sponsor, where you would need to mention that which date you have verified this document, and you should have a record in place. Then the third point, which is verifying the right to work check. So if they are a British or Irish national, you can verify their right to work using their original documents, or you can do the IDVT technology, which is identity validation technology, which is available with some of the softwares these days. Or if they are not Irish or domestic worker or citizen nationals, then you have to use the right to work check online, which is called share code. And I hope everyone is familiar with the share code. Share code is a new online system where you will be able to check the status of an immigration migrant worker, whether they have the legal status. So it is a case normal employees we've been asked to share a share code where the employer will be able to put that share code into an online platform where you will be able to check their status and keep a copy of that in your records. And when it comes to share code, there are 3 types of share codes. Some of the share codes starts with R and some of the share codes starts with S. These are not for the purpose of employment. So the share codes that is for the purpose of employment starts with the letter W. So even if you get a share code starting with R or L, you wouldn't be able to use that share code to confirm someone's right to work check. So it is always has to be starting with W. That's something you would need to keep an eye on when you get. It is something people often get confused with the share code because some of the applicants, they're not really sure which share code they have to share. So the share code has to be starting with W. Moving to the retaining evidence. So every time when you do a right to work check, it is a legal requirement that you must keep a record of the document that you checked. It can be kept as a hard copy or a soft copy. If you are keeping it as a hard copy or soft copy, you also have to adhere with the GDPR guidance. And when you do a right to work check online, the document itself would give you the validity, and you are required to redo a check at the end of that validity period. And if you are a sponsor, as a part of the compliance requirement, you should have a data, or you should have a system in place where you will be able to carry out a recheck at the end of every expiry date. So there should be a system where you'll be able to recheck these documents at the end of their expiry. And you should have a separate record. As I said, you should have a separate record to prove that when you have done these ID checks and also when it's going to be the expiry. So it is always a better practice to maintain these records. Moving to next slide, sponsor workers and their roles. This is some of the issues we have seen quite recently with some of the sponsor workers. So if you are sponsoring someone as a care worker, they're only allowed to work as a care worker. They're not allowed to work in any other role within their sponsorship. We have seen a number of cases where someone has been sponsored as a care worker. Down the road, they've been progressed as a senior care worker. So if they have been sponsored, then if they've been promoted to another role, you would need to issue a new certificate of sponsorship. And one of the key things, the Home Office is now looking into the sponsorship responsibilities. When you assign a COS to a migrant worker, there'll be a job description which you will be inputting into the SMS or the COS, and you would need to make sure that the migrant worker is covering all aspects of within that job description. We have seen quite recently one of the Home Office has taken legal action against a care firm based in England, where one of the care worker has been doing medication training, which is being given as a part of their job responsibilities. So it is a legal requirement that migrant workers will need to fulfill what is being given in their job description. And there have been always questions on sponsor workers. Migrant workers are allowed to work 20 hours for another employer during their sponsorship period, which has to be outside of their full-time hours. They're allowed to do on the same job, or they're allowed to do a job which is on the shortage occupation list or the immigration list. So while we have often seen that sponsor work has been done another roles, which is not permitted, and especially when it comes to short staffing, we have seen people have been doing different jobs which is not permitted within the sponsorship guidance. You often get a question from your employees whether they are allowed to work for another employer during their sponsorship. Yes, they are allowed to work for another employer which is outside of their contracted hours with you first. So they have to meet their contracted hours first. Then they will be allowed to do maximum of 20 hours on a same role on another role which is advertised or which is listed on a shortage occupation list. Moving to the next slide. Sponsor workers. This is some of the common mistakes what we have seen. So the first one is care workers are not allowed to work as senior care workers if they've been sponsored by yourself. And it's the same was vice versa. If you have been sponsored someone as a senior care worker and they have done the role for 12 months or more, and if there's any reason, if you want them to move to a care worker role, then you would need to change their sponsorship. And it's the same way, if you have any care worker, senior worker who progress to a registered nurse role, they're not allowed to work as a registered nurse until they get the new sponsorship, until they get the new visa. Even if it's with the same employer, they're not allowed to work. So when someone is being sponsored, they're not allowed to do the job they've been sponsored. Then it comes to the Home Office compliance requirements. I'm not really going into detail, just give you a bit more, this number of things you have to maintain as a part of compliance requirements being a sponsor. But one of the key things now Home Office is looking at when it comes to a compliance visit, before you sponsor someone, you should have the evidence to prove that these vacancies are genuine. That's the most important part. There have been some requirements called RMLT, Resident Market Labour Test, which has been removed back in 2020. Up until that point, before you sponsor a migrant worker, you have to prove that you do not have enough workers available, or you do not have enough applications available from the local market. There was a legal requirement. You have to advertise through Job Center and also a nationwide and national job seeker platform. That requirement has been taken off. However, it is still a legal requirement that you have to prove that the vacancies are genuine. Therefore, you should have the evidence to prove that you're not filling a position with a migrant worker. You are genuinely filling that position. So you should have evidence to confirm that these vacancies are genuine. Second one, when employing a migrant worker, you should ensure that they have the necessary skills, experience, knowledge, and qualifications. Obviously, for care workers and senior care workers, there isn't any qualification requirement at the moment, but in Scotland, it is a legal requirement. They must be registered with a CCC within 12 months. So you have to meet that requirement, and also you would need to make sure that they have the necessary skills, experience, and knowledge to fulfill that role. And the third point, when employing a sponsor, as I said, you need to ensure that they're fulfilling their job responsibilities and also the hours. So if they've been given a contract, if they've been given a COS with the weekly hours of 42 hours, it is a legal requirement that they have to do that 42 hours. They can work anything more than that, but if the hours given on the COS is based on that's the minimum hours they would need to do every week. So I would probably recommend it is always better to keep minimum of 37.5 hours on a weekly contract. But if they wanted to do more, they are allowed to work more hours. So that's the three things. There are some other requirements on the compliance point. You should have a system in place where you have all the HR documents in place. So there's a couple of things which I will be happy to share in an email to you. So this is some of the informations, some of the useful tips from our own experience. So when it comes to international recruitment, what we always hear from employers, it is very expensive. So if you're sponsoring someone on a student visa, you will be exempted from paying the immigration skills surcharge. You might be aware that you have as a part of the issuing a COS, you have to pay an immigration skills surcharge to the Home Office. And the surcharge has been divided into two categories. If you're a small employer, your surcharge will be £364 per year per migrant worker. And if you're a large employer, which would be £1,000 per year per migrant worker. And the way they categorize, if your turnover is more than 10 million, and if you have more than 50 staff, you'll be classified as a large employer, where your immigration skills surcharge will be £1,000 per year. So if you're sponsoring a student for a 5-year visa, you have to pay £5,000 immigration skills surcharge. Sorry, if you're not sponsoring a student, if you're sponsoring someone else or someone from a different visa category, your immigration skills surcharge would be £5,000 plus the COS cost, which is £239. But there is an exemption for students. If someone has completed a student program in the UK, then if you have been sponsored to that role, you'll be exempted paying that immigration skills surcharge. Your cost will be £239. Then the next point, you often have employees on a sponsorship. and normally most of the employers tend to issue a 3-year certificate of sponsorship. And at the end of the 3rd year, normally we often see that employers go ahead and issue another 3 years. Migrant workers are allowed to apply for indefinite leave to remain at the end of their 4th year. So they can apply for, they can submit an application to the Home Office a month before when they turn the 5th year. So they can always go with the 5-year COS. So we would personally recommend you do a 3-year COS first, then the second COS can be a 2-year COS instead of 3 years, where you will save at least £1,000 on your immigration skill surcharge, or you could issue a COS directly issue a COS for 5 years, which would save a number of costs. For the first thing is for the applicant, and also it would save a cost of the reissuing the COS and also the HR paperwork after 3 years. If there's any chance, or if there's any case, if the employee has been terminated or if they have resigned from that role, you would get a partial refund from the Home Office, which is at the moment £500. They consider as £500 for every 6 months. So if you paid £5,000, and if when someone leaves the employment after 2 years, you will automatically get £3,000 back to the card you used to make that payment. So it is a case you're not losing anything, but there's an upfront cost, but that will be automatically reimbursed if they have moved out from that role. Next point, it's some of the issues is more of what we have seen in Scotland, because we have seen a number of cases. When it comes to a right to work check, it is a legal requirement that we have to do the right to work check for all our direct employees, and also it is applicable for agency workers and also contracted employees. It is your legal responsibility as an employer. So we often see a lot of operators use temporary agencies. So if you are getting staff from temporary agencies, you should have a system in place that they are not sending someone who doesn't have a legal status to work in the UK, or who are doing more than their allowed work. So what we have seen, temporary agencies are now sending sponsored migrant workers to care homes as an agency staff, which is not permitted within the sponsorship. There have been some issues nationwide with Home Office. We have seen there have been issued licenses to temporary agencies, and where the temporary agencies sponsored migrant workers, and they've been allowed to work as an agency staff, which is not permitted within the Home Office guidance. So we have seen, so that's something you would need to have a system in place, or you need to have a contract in place that it is their responsibility to ensure that they should not be sending a sponsored migrant worker to you. Second one, sponsor workers are allowed to work 20 hours on a supplementary role that is beyond their full-time contract hours. Then the third point, employing a migrant worker in the UK on a sponsorship. One of the key things, so we often see employers are getting lots of applications around. So when you are employing someone who is already in the UK on a sponsorship, and if they're applying to you, you would need to check why they are coming to you, why they're moving out from their sponsor. Because normally, as I said, every employer would issue a 3-year sponsorship. There must be some reasons behind if they are moving out. There was always a reason: career opportunities, better opportunities, but there are some other opportunities. They've been sponsored with an employer, they're not getting enough hours, or they have the sponsorship, but they don't have a job, or they might have some sort of immigration breach within their role. So you need to do that checks before you sponsor someone. I would strongly recommend employers to do the reference check before you sponsor someone, to ensure that you have the clear record and you have the clear background of the applicant before you sponsor someone. I think that's pretty much end of my section. Thank you so much. As I said, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at the end of this. I'll pass that over to Allan. Let me quickly stop my screen sharing.
Thank you, Fabian. Let me just click my present, and hopefully that will come up. And click. Can you hear me all right before I start? Yep, brilliant.
Yeah, we can see you and hear you.
Excellent. Right. Let's wait for PowerPoint to come up. Still working on it. Well, whilst that's just loading, let me just say, there we go. Good morning. And firstly, thank you to Osborne and Allan for inviting me along this morning. As Emma said, my name is Allan Povey, and I'm a specialist lead in international recruitment, currently with the Centre for Workforce Supply Social Care team at NHS Education for Scotland. Now, I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes on the international recruitment project that I've been involved with over the last year and the key lessons that I will take away from it. Now, the project was a joint endeavour between COSLA, NES and the Scottish Government, who provided the funding, but many other organisations, such as Osborne and Allan, have contributed significantly to the successes that we have had. Now, our ambition for the project was to try different ways of supporting international recruitment within the Scottish adult social care sector, just to see what worked well, what didn't work well, and to identify what the challenges and opportunities might be, and then make recommendations to the Scottish Government of a model of support for international recruitment that could be taken forwards. Now, the project had 4 key underlying principles. The first was all recruitment should be done with the aim of retaining staff long term, as both recruitment and retention are currently issues within the sector. And then we would work with providers to determine how they could both identify and make best use of the internal assets they currently had that were relevant to international recruitment, and any external assets that could also be of value, such as local cultural groups. And we emphasised throughout the project the value and requirement for a robust pastoral support package, such as providing the first 3 months accommodation and a welcome pack, maybe allocating buddies and much more. And the project needed to be data driven, which meant requiring participating care providers to provide updated data on their progress throughout the project. Now, there were 3 levels of participation in the project. At the universal support level, we invited any care provider to join our network, hosted on LinkedIn, to access the tools and resources that we had developed throughout the project through our open site on Turas. And of course, to participate in our regular webinars that would focus on different aspects of international recruitment. At the community of practice level, our care providers could access all of the above, plus we organised and funded some specific training for them. And then at the top of our pyramid, we had our core providers who received funding to participate in international recruitment and in return committed to attending regular meetings, provide regular data updates, and to meet the high standards for pastoral support that we required. So that was a quick overview of the project. I'd like to turn now to my key takeaways. Well, firstly, I don't think anyone will be surprised when I say that international recruitment can be challenging. We deliberately chose the care providers for our project to represent the 3 different segments of the social care sector: as local authorities, private providers, and the not-for-profit or charities, as we wish to identify the different sorts of challenges that each of these parts of the sector would have. Now, local authorities tended to have more complex internal procedures for procurement and commissioning than private or charitable care providers, as they are dealing with public money, and this did result in slower decisions on some occasions. The voluntary sector care providers tended to have very lean internal staffing structures, potentially limiting the organisation's capacity and capability for international recruitment. And private providers probably have the most flexible internal structures that could be leveraged to support international recruitment and generally make decisions faster. But that said, in our pilot project, it was a local authority who first had recruits arrive in the country, primarily because they were the first to have their certificate of sponsorship applications approved, but also because of the wonderful support that they received from Emma at Osborne and Allan, who acted as their recruitment agents and supported them throughout the whole process. Now, getting applications for certificates of sponsorship approved has been one of the biggest challenges. Especially challenging for some has been proving that they have actual existing vacancies rather than the promise of more commissions if they had additional staff. And care providers, including local authorities, have been asked to provide additional documentation to prove their bona fide status as a genuine care provider. So one of the resources that we produced was a guide to applying for certificates of sponsorship. Now, following it won't guarantee approval, but it will increase your chances. And the government website still states that applications are usually approved within 1 working day. But in practice, care providers have experienced delays of over 18 weeks. But that said, earlier this week, I was told that one of our core providers had had their certificates of sponsorship approved within 3 hours. So I am hopeful that normal service has indeed been resumed. I think it's fair to say that international recruitment has always been perceived as challenging, but changes to immigration laws announced late last year and introduced earlier this year strengthened that perception and has further discouraged care providers from engaging in international recruitment. So we worked on breaking down the changes and conducting analysis of the impact they might have on international recruitment into the social care sector. We then presented that analysis in webinars and other forums and, to some degree, assured care providers that the changes announced, although not without impact in some areas, were not going to prohibit international recruitment into social care. Now, the other major challenge that our participating care providers came up against was finding accommodation for their international recruits. To be part of the project required them to agree to finding and providing, free of charge, suitable accommodation for the candidates' first 3 months of employment to help them feel welcomed and to settle in. Of course, the team recognised that 3 months free accommodation is the gold standard, but the real challenge seems to have been in finding suitable accommodation, regardless of whether it is the employee or the employer who is paying for it. Well, the next thing I would like to mention is that international recruitment can be financially viable. Yes, international recruitment is more expensive than domestic recruitment, but if we could meet all our recruitment requirements domestically, then we wouldn't need to recruit internationally in the first place. International recruitment can certainly be more cost-effective than using expensive agency staff. And international recruitment can be more cost-effective than turning down care users and commissioning opportunities. And don't forget the cost of a high staff turnover. Now, the pilot project had provided some funding for the care providers involved, but lots of other care providers are engaged in international recruitment without the benefit of that funding and will continue to do so, because financially it makes sense for them. So before discounting international recruitment on cost grounds, a care provider should take the time to do a thorough cost-benefit analysis. And international recruitment is not a silver bullet, but it can play a key role in mitigating workforce shortfalls across the social care sector. Now, the last Care Inspectorate SSE workforce vacancy report showed record levels of care providers reporting vacancies. Across the care sector, the average was 49%, compared to an average of 11% across all other sectors in Scotland. In some regions, the vacancy rate was as high as 60%. And across Scotland, care homes for adults were faring the worst, with an average of 76% reporting vacancies. And the main reason cited for high vacancy levels, not enough applicants. The report also showed the stability index was around 75%. So care providers were losing 25% of their staff a year, with half of those leaving the sector entirely. Now, a recent Scottish Care survey released in April this year showed that 2/3 of its members were currently recruiting internationally, but that 68% were not considering international recruitment in the future. The survey also found that in 7 regions, over 25% of staff were international recruits, and that a number of care providers had 95 to 100% of staff from outside of the UK. Well, furthermore, international recruitment doesn't just address the high vacancy rates, it also helps to address staff stability. As international recruits are dependent on a sponsor, they are far less likely to seek employment opportunities elsewhere. Something else to consider when doing that cost-benefit analysis. So it's not just that international recruitment could play a key role in mitigating workforce shortfalls, it already is. And so finally to the opportunities international recruitment can offer. So despite recent changes to UK immigration regulations that could already seem complicated and daunting, international recruitment does provide opportunities to continue mitigating at least some of the significant social care workforce shortfalls. But to do that, the sector needs help. It needs somewhere to turn when, as so frequently happens, they come up against a problem that they don't know how to overcome. Or they just want to be able to talk to someone who can offer some reasoned and informed advice. The sector needs a centre for excellence that can help care providers to navigate through the challenges of international recruitment, to mentor, educate and guide all of those 68% who said they weren't planning to internationally recruit in the future because it was just all becoming too difficult and too expensive. These people need someone who can support them and help them to realise what a golden opportunity international recruitment can be. Thank you. That's it for me. I'll hand back to Emma.
Thanks. It was fantastic. Great to hear your insights into international recruitment with the pilot scheme and how it's all kind of come to an end.
My pleasure.
And I'm sure you'll probably be aware that you're doing your own webinar at 1 o'clock with the pilot scheme, so hopefully I'll join you then as well. I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen and they'll go on to OSCE support. As that came up all right.
Yes.
So as I mentioned, we, as part of the larger group, we have our own OSCE training centres. Our OSCE training centre is down in Oxford, and we have and support there for CBT, NMC process, many other things like your IELTS, all the tests and exams that you would need to become the registered nurse in the UK. One of the things that we've been trialling with Avondale Care is the SIFE pathway route to go down. SIFE pathway is basically when you recruit somebody over to the UK as a carer and they are back home but have maybe had the right qualifications to come over as a pre-registered nurse. These carers over to the UK, work in the UK for 1 year within their employment, and after the 1 year they can then be put forward to complete their OSCE exam and become the registered nurse through the SIFE pathway. And to give you a bit more information on that because he was kind of leading the pilot scheme that we've just done on it. And then I do have a leaflet that if you would like to know any, you can drop me an email. My details will be at the end of today's presentation and I can send that over. So Febin, do you want to pin for a minute?
Thanks, Emma. So what we have been seeing in the health and social care sector up until last year, obviously, majority of the NHS were recruiting from international with the funding from the government. As you might be aware that there was a election manifesto from 2019 where the government was offering 50,000 nurses to the NHS. There have been active recruitment happening all across the NHS. So it has always been a competition between NHS and social care sector on international recruitment. And what we have always seen, a lot of overseas nurses tend to prefer to work in NHS for various reasons. And we always had a direct competition when it comes to recruiting someone to a nursing home or a care home, especially in places like in remote areas. And for that reason, we looked into the solutions, because one of the key challenges the employers were facing, obviously the NHS is offering a relocation package which could go up to £5,000 to £6,000. When it comes to a private operator or a small single operator, it is difficult for them to spend that sort of amount on a relocation package. So it was a challenging part. So with the new update from Nursing and Midwifery Council last year, NMC has introduced a new pathway, which is supporting information from employers pathway for overseas qualified nurses. In summary, if you employ an overseas qualified nurse as a care worker or a senior care worker, they can progress into a registered nurse role using the SIFE form from the employer. It is essentially the employer is recommending putting a reference to the NMC, confirming that the migrant worker has got the less level of language proficiency to fulfill that role. It is a form where we will be assessing the individual applicants' speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills, which would be signed off by a NMC registered nurse and also have to be signed off by one of the manager. Then that document would use as an evidence to bypass their English language requirement. When it comes to international nurses to register as a nurse with NMC, one of the key challenges they go through is to meet the required language requirement. And while we have done this part, we have taken we have recruited 3 nurses from overseas qualified nurses from India. We have tested their language proficiency through their IELTS exam. So we have asked them to do their IELTS. So they all came with 6.5 in IELTS. The requirement for someone to register with NMC is 7 band in IELTS document, which is an international language testing system. So they came back with 6.5 and they had the necessary language skills, and they've been offered a role as a senior care worker for the first 1 year. And end of the year, we support them through their NMC registration. We support them through their competency exam, which is CBT part 1. We also support them through their OSCE. So they have done we have provided their OSCE training. They have done their OSCE exam at Oxford Brookes University, and they secured their NMC registration quite recently. And last week, they now started working as a registered nurse. So the benefit in terms on an employer point of view, first thing, your costs are much cheaper. The second point, they've been in the system for a year. They are well aware of the regulations and legislations, and they worked in a care environment for more than 1 year with you. So they have that experience and knowledge. And on the retention element, we felt it is one of the best options. So if you are a nursing home operator, and if you have challenges in recruiting nurses to fulfill your vacancies, this is one of the key route you could consider, and where you need to assess their language skills, and you have to provide that document to the Nursing Midwifery Council, which is an electronic form, which you would need to, the applicant would provide you that form, you would submit that form to the NMC. And once they have done their CBT and OSCE examination, which is a clinical competency test, once they have done, normally NMC would issue their NMC registration within 30 to 40 working days. I think that's all from Emma.
Thanks, Vim. So just another brief bit about the OSCE. If you're bringing somebody over as a pre-registered nurse without going down the SIFE pathway, obviously one of the conditions on their COS will be that they must sit their OSCE exam within a timescale of 12 weeks from commencing employment with you. We at Osborne and Allan have full access to the training centre in Oxford, and the training consists of 1 week online training followed by a week of face-to-face training down in Oxford. We will fully support with the booking of travel and accommodation for your candidate, and we'll do all the booking of the OSCE exams and travel for that as well. Just to touch briefly on some of the costs associated with the OSCE. So the OSCE training that we would provide is £840 inclusive of VAT. The OSCE exam is £794 inclusive of VAT, and the resit, if they ever did need to do a resit, is slightly less at £397 including VAT. Travel and accommodation, obviously I don't want to put a price on that because it's variable depending on the time of year, how long they need to go for it and where they're travelling from. That's it from us. I am going to open up now to a discussion and invite you to ask myself, Alan, or Febin any questions that you might have. I just want to open with one question that I got sent on LinkedIn by somebody that couldn't attend today. So she had come and asked, can somebody that you're sponsoring move to another employer? So she's in the situation at the minute where somebody that she's sponsoring is looking to move. The answer is yes, they can, but they will need to have a full sponsorship in place from their new employer before they can actually fully transition to a new employment. What we also hear a lot on the back of that is, but I put a lot of cost in, I paid a lot of money for this person to come over and start working. Can I reclaim that? Yes, you can, but you have had to have had that in a contract or an offer of employment and signed by the candidate at the time of them starting their employment with you. If you don't have that there, you don't really have that cover. So we would recommend, you know, before they even start, get it in the offer letter, get it in your contract of employment that you will be reclaiming the funds if they terminate their employment before the end of their sponsorship period with you. And that will just kind of cover your back on that. So I'm just going to hand over to you. Is there any questions that anybody would like to ask and direct? I've seen Gordon ask a question. I think he's left now, but Alan, I think you answered that in the chat. Is there anything else that anybody would like to come in and ask?
Emma, just to add on that reclaiming the cost from the candidates, there have been some guidance from the NHS employees, which is published on the government website last year. You have absolutely, it is legal to recoup your recruitment cost from a migrant worker if it's a part of their recruitment. However, you should be encouraged to use a rebate scheme if they've been sponsored, and you can only claim the actual cost.
Yeah.
On the Home Office point of view, you're not allowed to claim their immigration skills surcharge or the cost of their CIS, but where you are allowed to claim everything else, including their accommodation or any training cost, but you're only allowed to charge the actual cost. There is a guidance available on the government website on that part.
That's great, thanks, Evan. So Charlene has a question. If we have a BRP on file for a team member and we have used this to do the manual right to work check, do we still need to do the online right to work check using a share code? Yes, absolutely. So you will need to go on and create the share code or get your candidate to create the share code and then go on and do the employer check. And you will need to keep a copy of that either digitally or on file. That is a requirement from the Home Office. You will need to go on and do the online right to work check as well. No problem, Charlene, thank you. That's fine, Claire. Okay, I'll just close it to an end there. Thanks everybody for coming along to today's event. We will have access to this presentation in PDF form if you would like. I will pop my contact details up just now. We've got some testimonials. And if you want to get in touch to get a copy of the presentation, then please do, and we can send that over to you in a PDF format. Don't think the details are coming up, are they? Let me just try clicking right to the end.
Ebba, could I just say that I did write a guide to repayment clauses.
Okay.
I'm happy to share. I can send it to you and you can send it out if people would like that. Yeah,
that would be brilliant.
No problem.
I hope you can all see the contact details. I'll leave them up, but yeah, thanks very much again for attending.
Thank you.